Thank you all for joining us for the How to Write a Conference Proposal Advice on Finding Calls, Writing an Abstract, and Submitting Your Scholarship Research workshop. Joining us today is Melissa Bowles-Terry, Associate Director at the Faculty Center. She's going to be sharing a plan for pitching your research and sharing some sample abstracts, in addition to answering any questions you may have in this area. So I'm going to hand it over to her and let her get us started. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be with you today. And I am really happy to answer questions that you have. So please do go ahead and put those in the chat at any point throughout. And we'll also have some time for Q&A at the end of my presentation today. So some of you may have presented at conferences in the past, in which case I'd also welcome you sharing your experience. So please feel free to share not just your questions, but also any comments that you might have about writing conference proposals. And I look forward to our conversation. I'm going to share some slides. So my subtitle kind of says what I aim to do today. We're going to talk about the whole process of finding calls, writing an abstract, and submitting your scholarly work. And this is specific to a conference proposal, but you can take a lot of these tips and apply them to writing other types of proposals as well. Calls for proposals come out for anthologies, articles, all kinds of things, but this will be specifically about those conference proposals. So our goals for today, you're going to think about broad guidelines for writing an effective conference proposal. You'll examine a few different proposals and think about how effective they are. And I have some rubrics to share that are used by selection committees as well. So you can think about how you tailor your proposal to the criteria. Please make a note of the bit.ly down in the bottom right corner. All my materials are available for you at that URL in a Google Drive folder where you'll find some sample proposals, some sample rubrics, as well as these slides. So in the chat, I'd love for you to share anything that you don't understand or would love to know about, and we can revisit that at the end of the session, make sure that we've answered any questions that you have. But when it comes to thinking about like putting your work out there for a conference, share anything that it is that you would really like to know, and we'll try to make sure that we get to that by the end. So this is a short article that I found that I thought was really helpful to think about pitching your research at just about anything. This author, Dr. Catherine Baker, kind of breaks it down into 5 parts of what you should try and tell a committee who's selecting work for a conference about what you're going to do to advance knowledge in this field. So I'm going to talk through this 5-part plan that Dr. Catherine Baker shared, and you'll note the URL down at the bottom if you want to look closer at this. But basically, in a proposal, you want to start with the current state of knowledge in the field that you're engaging with. And of course, this is different from discipline to discipline, but you want to do a little bit of a performance, as she says, about who we are in this discipline for the purposes of joining this conversation. So this example says ethnographic perspectives on peace support operations invite us to view their activities and thus their exercise of power as constituted by multiple acts of written and spoken communication between agents of foreign intervention and local people and institutions within the sites of intervention. So you're putting out there, I know what people are saying in this field. I am aware of the latest literature and what is going on in this particular conversation. So a conference is a conversation, scholarship is a conversation. So here's where you sort of signal that you're aware of the conversation that has been going on in this area. That's part 1. Part 2 is how you personally, you as a scholar, are going to move this narrative forward. So this is where you point out some holes or some misconceptions or some areas where you feel like the conversation is going in the wrong direction. Something is wrong with whatever it is that we think we know. This is where the yet or the but comes in. Yet, since most military personnel in most interventions rarely speak the languages of their destination, this power rests in fact on multiple acts of translation and interpreting. So that's part 2, where you say, everyone has been saying this, but my thesis or my idea, my grand scheme is going to take us in a slightly different direction because there's something wrong with what we've been thinking about this topic. Part 3, step number 3, is that you offer a solution. You as a researcher have something important to contribute to this conversation that's going to right the wrong that's been going on or steer us in a better direction. Offering a solution like, to fully understand this dimension of international security, we must therefore understand the experiences and positionalities of language intermediaries, not just of foreign military actors. So you're saying, here's what I have to contribute. It's very important and very compelling, and thus you must accept my conference proposal. Number 4 is the methodology. This is where you explain what you did or what you will have done by the time the conference rolls around to solve the problem like you said you would. And this is often projecting into the future because a call for proposals will often come out 6 months or even a year in advance of a conference. So, you're looking in your crystal ball and thinking about what will I have accomplished by the time this comes around. And you share a little bit about your methodology in this example, reflecting on 52 semi-structured interviews with foreign soldiers and locally recruited interpreters collected during a project on peace operations in Bosnia-Herzegovina. So this says, here's what I did. And then 5 is the resolution or the results that say, we got there. We figured out the gap in our knowledge, where things were going wrong. We did some on-the-ground research to figure out what was happening. And this paper suggests ways in which language and translation identity are embodied, exploring nationality, ethnicity, military, civilian status, and primarily gender. How did the discursive gendering of language and translation or interpreting structure recruitment and employment practices for language intermediaries? How did male interpreters negotiate the feminization of their role? And how did the feminization of translation or interpreting intersect with what has been perceived with problematic essentialism as a wider conceptual feminization of contemporary militaries through peace support? You'll notice this is still full of questions, but you're promising a lot in this proposal that you're going to answer all these questions once you're actually at the conference and giving the presentation. So that's your 5 parts for pitching your research at almost anything. Go back just to take a look at this again. So what you're doing is pointing out the current state of knowledge, showing where something is wrong with what we think we know, saying this is what's missing, this paper is going to show why, here's the methodology, and here's the conclusion, the results to really show how you're going to make a difference in this field. So that is what you want to do in your proposal. Now, where do you find calls for proposals? This probably makes me show my age when I say listservs, but for many disciplines, there are still active listservs where people put out calls for proposals. So I come from the world of academic libraries, and our big conference happens every 2 years, Association of College and Research Libraries. And of course, I know exactly where to go for that call, and I sort of know when it's coming out. But for other smaller conferences that I may not have heard of before, there are several different listservs where that comes up. There are, of course, the conference websites. So once you have an idea of the conferences in your field and when they happen, you can just pop right over to their websites. You can find the experts to follow on Twitter or other social media sites who will likely be sharing these types of things. And there are different resources, like for me, things like a library writer's blog or academic writing librarians. Folks there share calls for proposals for book chapters, especially. I see those come up all the time. And I am curious about additional sources that you all might go to for CFPs. So feel free to put those in the chat. But I also want to give you a piece of advice. I haven't ever done this myself, but I know of a couple of colleagues who just have their spreadsheet of like, these are the conferences that I'm interested in attending. This is when they usually put out their call for proposals, and then they'll put those dates in their calendar to say, you know, look out for this call for proposals, look out for that call for proposals, so that they won't miss it if it comes out on a yearly basis or less often. Just look at my notes here for a second. Okay. So now I would like to just give you a chance to take a look at some sample proposals. So I'm going to get out of my slides for a second here. And I'm going to put this bit.ly URL in the chat so that you can go there yourself. Okay, so if you put that URL in, yeah, that'll get you to our Google Drive folder. And then there's a folder with sample proposals. So as I said, you can look at these yourself, but I'll also open them up on and sort of we'll walk through this. But what I'd like for us to do is look at a proposal and think about how it might be stronger if we applied the 5 parts that we discussed earlier. Okay, so I'm going to open up the AAC&U Diversity, Equity, and Student Success proposal, and then we're going to apply these parts. So I'm going to put these in the chat as well so that we have them right in front of us. These are the 5 parts. Okay, and I'll share my screen again to look at the sample proposal. Okay, so this is a proposal that had a really structured sort of call. So it had to have a title, it had to have learning outcomes for participants, 250 words only on the background and evidence of effectiveness, 75 to 125 words for a brief description. So this is so short, right? They were looking for something very quick. So what we came up with were these learning outcomes, and the description, you know, where we really got to put in the meat of the description was in this 250 word section about the background and evidence of effectiveness. So take a look at this and then tell me in the chat if there are ways you think the 5 parts that we talked through earlier could make this even more effective. Oh yeah, as Nev says, you can unmute yourselves and say things as well. Just waiting. I'll say that one of the challenges with having something this brief is that you take some of the parts for granted, like starting with the current state of knowledge. Since this conference is titled Diversity, Equity, and Student Success, we kind of know what the problem is. It's a lack of diversity and equity and student success in higher education. And so what we're proposing as a solution is developing a culture of educational equity in the classroom, and then sharing something that we did at UNLV to address this problem. So really getting into the solution and talking some about the methodology in terms of, what we did. I'm going to open up the other sample proposal here. So this one has a bit more space for thinking about how, just a lot more words, a lot more space for description of what the research is all about. So this is a proposal for a conference on higher education, the Association for the Study of Higher Education. The title of the proposal is Family Feud, Campus Custodians and the Corporate University. And in this one, they really go through a bit more of a traditional laying out the research study, talking about the corporate university, talking about family discourse, and there's space for references, which is another signal on of that first part, starting with the current state of knowledge in the field. So this is what another conference proposal might look like for a very different conference, a very different kind of research project. So the other thing that I've shared in this folder are some sample rubrics. So when you're on a selection committee planning a conference, if you're lucky, then there's a detailed rubric that you can use to score the proposals as they come in, to say, this one really meets our criteria, this one doesn't. And I shared this one with you all because I thought it was pretty well done, a scoring rubric for a conference on online teaching. It's fairly simple, straightforward, but what you're looking for is a description of the activities approaches, sufficient background information, addressing the impact and significance, results, mechanics, and the length. Again, this is for an abstract that's just 200 words. So 200 words, 250 words, it's just one page. You have to be very precise. The other rubric I shared with you all is another form that just has the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rating for the things that folks are looking for as they're scoring these proposals. Okay, so what questions have come up for you so far, or what comments do you have about your own experience proposing research for a conference or in another venue if that is more relevant for your discipline?
So I have a question here. What should I know about the selection process that's maybe not common knowledge or that I would not know as a first-time applicant or submitter?
Mhm. That's a great question. And one thing I would say is that sometimes the theme of the conference, which changes from year to year, is really important. So make note of that. And if there are keywords from the conference description that you can work into your proposal, that can be super helpful. I also always think it's useful to look back at conference proceedings if possible, or at least past conference websites to see how formal is the level of proposal and presentation at this conference, because there are some that are less formal and are really about like saying, here's how we did this at my institution. And then there are very research intensive conferences where it's like you write a paper and read it. So those are different types of experiences for sure. And it's important to sort of be aware of that. If you haven't attended the conference before, learn as much as you can about it before writing your proposal. It's even better if you can attend, and get a view of that before you present. And in these pandemic times where most conferences are online and registrations are discounted in some cases, that can be kind of a good opportunity to just sit in, view some presentations so that next time around you'll have more information as you're proposing something to the conference. So I guess in a nutshell, learn everything you can about the conference and try and sort of match the level of formality and discourse that you see there.
Thank you. And I got another question. Are there some things that maybe would make the selection committee immediately say no or yes, consider this one at a glance?
Mm-hmm. I think that people tend to look right at formatting. You saw on those rubrics that actually the length and the mechanics were on the rubric. Like, is it nice and tidy? Does it meet our word requirement? So make sure you're paying attention to those issues of form. And then also, is it thematically on target? So as I've been on these types of selection committees in the past, they'll say pretty clearly in the call for proposals, we are looking for presentations to advance knowledge on this topic. And so you want to make sure that your research project matches that and does advance the topic. And if it's not a great match, then you can always look for another conference. And I think that as graduate students or even as beginning scholars, you can sort of try out your research at more regional conferences. That can be a good thing to look for. There may be something, Southwestern that you can do, or I've seen a lot of California conferences specifically because that's such a populous state and has a couple of big university systems. Sometimes there's a conference just there that you can get to pretty easily, present at, and sort of try out your research project before you take it to a bigger national audience. Any other questions coming up? Another suggestion I have for folks who are just starting out is collaborative research is really great in a conference setting because then you can potentially, really learn from your colleagues, potentially present with a mentor, an advisor. That's a good way to get started and learn a lot as you're just beginning.
So I just got another question. Generally, how long is the process and what does just kind of in general the process include?
It depends quite a bit on different conferences. So definitely ask an advisor or a mentor like the specifics of the conference you might be interested in attending. But I would say in general for the big national conferences, they'll generally put a call out a year or 8 months in advance. you respond to it, and have your acceptance 6 months before the conference, and then it's a matter of preparing your presentation. And there are a variety of types of conference presentations, of course. A poster session where you prepare your poster and then you're there to answer questions about it, share more about it. You may have a contributed paper, which is more like reading, like a 6 or 8 page paper presenting the findings of that type of a research project. But more and more, I'm seeing things like workshops or lightning talks, which are a lot more engaging than a contributed paper session where people just like share sort of a lengthy research project where it's like, I could have read this. But I I've really been drawn to that kind of conference where it's more interactive and people are sharing and presenting their work when it's meant to be more like a conversation.
Thank you. So we have a question in the chat. Can you speak a little bit about the more non-conventional type of proposals, like maybe lit reviews, research in progress, or things that can be done prior to data collection?
Mhm. Yeah, so that that could be just like something I was saying, like maybe a lightning talk, a round table, convening a kind of a discussion on your research topic rather than going through, methodology results, future directions, that sort of thing. I am finding more and more opportunities for that. And that is a great way to sort of get your foot in the door and start entering that conversation in a less research intensive way. Like maybe, as you said, you don't have data just yet. Um, but timing is everything with these conferences too. And, like I mentioned with my big library conference, it only happens every 2 years. So thinking about like, what will I have to present in 2023? It's just like, ugh, who knows what 2023 will bring? 2020 and 21 have been such a ride already. How can we predict what's happening in the future? But just thinking about that cycle, thinking about your own research trajectory, and thinking about either a yearly cycle of conferences that come around and timing it right so that you have data to present, or just thinking about what stage your research is going to be in when that next conference rolls around is important. Not that you can necessarily time your project to be done at the moment when you get that national stage, but do consider like way ahead, what'll be coming up next year in terms of the conference rounds. And hopefully we'll be able to go places again. But it has been nice to have a lot of conferences available online without any conference travel costs. But you do also miss out on some of the networking, which is my favorite part of going to a conference, is seeing friends from graduate school and meeting folks that you've read their work or you've met them on Twitter, and then meeting in real life. It's one of the best parts of academia, I think.
Hopefully we can get back there soon, right?
Yeah.
So who do you recommend that we have review our proposals before we submit it?
Mm-hmm. Um, well, when I think about mentoring, um, I think about a kind of a web of mentors that you need to build up. So you have your official advisor, and that person is a great person to ask to review a proposal, but you might need lower key feedback first, right? So maybe some of your peers who you trust and have a good relationship, you could ask them to take a look at a proposal. There are always official routes to go, like make an appointment with the writing center to get some feedback on a proposal, and they can give you like some outside good feedback. If you have graduate school friends who are from a different discipline, you could ask them, like, would you take a look at this for me and see if it makes sense from an outsider perspective. So think about your mentor network, and it's not just your advisor for sure, but if you have other people, again, peers, or professors you've worked with but are not like the advisor, rely on those folks to give you some good feedback. And again, writing center is a great place to go.
So a follow-up question here is, do proposals need to be approved by an advisor? Is this best practice?
Mm-hmm. That depends on the type of research that you're doing. So if you are working in a lab, you have an official, PI on a project, then that person probably does need to sign off on any proposal that you're doing. Definitely keep them informed. If you're proposing some work on, some smaller aspect of the work that you've sort of done independently, then they should be in the loop on that. But if you are kind of a solo researcher, like we tend to be more in the humanities, social sciences, where you're kind of pursuing your own path of inquiry, just under the sort of supervision of an advisor, but they're not like the primary or the principal investigator on a project. I would definitely seek their advice. It's not like you have to have their approval. So again, this is a difference in the disciplines. If you're in the sciences, then you probably do have an advisor who is like overseeing a larger research project that you're like a small part of, right? But if you're getting a master's or a PhD in English or in sociology or something, you may just be kind of doing your own thing. So I would definitely, in any of those cases, talk to your advisor and say, I'm writing a proposal for such and such conference, and I'd love your feedback, just to keep them in the loop, let them know what you're up to.
Thank you. And I'm going to just drop here a link for the Writing Center. If anyone needed that, you can set up virtual consultations with them right now if you needed any help, right, reviewing your proposal or any other writing material you might have.
Great.
So, what are some of the different possible responses that we could get from a selection committee? So, do they provide feedback or do they just reject or approve?
I haven't seen many cases when you get feedback from a selection committee. Honestly, it's generally just a yes, please prepare this paper or poster and we'll see you at the conference, or no thank you, this didn't really meet our needs. I haven't seen a lot of cases where they'll say this didn't meet our needs because, or this didn't fit our conference because. It's usually just a yes or a no. And sometimes they'll also tell you the acceptance rate, and say like this was super competitive, 25% acceptance rate. And if you get accepted, then I think that's a great thing to include, in your description of the activity, whether you're putting it in an annual report or putting it, on your CV. You can say like, I got accepted to this conference that had a 20% acceptance rate, because, that makes it a little more impressive. They don't always say that. And, sometimes, again, with like a regional conference or something, it might not be a super selective thing. Still a good opportunity to get out there and present your research. But yeah, that is something to note if it's like a really competitive process.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Melissa, whether it's how to write the proposal or find calls or just submitting the overall research? I'll give everyone a few more minutes to think about it.
I think being successful with, getting involved with conferences is so much about becoming part of a conversation and part of a network. So really rely on your colleagues and your professors to help you get engaged with that conversation. It's really about, finding out what is happening like right now in the field before things can get published, before things can get, peer reviewed and out there. Conferences are where the really new stuff is getting presented. And I see another question about finding the best conferences for your discipline. Ask your major professor for sure. And ask your classmates if they're doing proposals for any conferences. And you can also just Google, conferences for whatever discipline you're in. But it's definitely something that people, again, who are part of the conversation and already in the network can tell you that you might not otherwise know. Okay, well, thank you all so much. I appreciated your questions and hope that you have great success finding conferences to present at and getting involved in that disciplinary conversation. I think it's pretty exciting, so I'm wishing you all the best in that.
Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today, Melissa. This was very informative. Before everyone logs off, I'm just going to put here in the chat a link to a quick feedback survey. This really helps us with our future workshops and just to evaluate what we should bring back and what we should change. So if y'all have just a minute to fill it out, it's very brief. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thank you all so much for joining us again.
Bye.